regarding Shakespeare. This is an unfortunate product of Elizabethan England. They didn't take nearly as many records as we do in modern times. We're quite lucky to have as much information on Shakespeare of Stratford, considering his social status. We do, however, have records that establish Shakespeare the playwright. Can I put these up? Yeah, these records are from the Master of Revels, which is based, and this is basically a record from when Shakespeare put on his plays in front of the king. So, notice how the numerous misspellings. It's pretty ridiculous how they spelled back then. It was kind of optional. Shakespeare. Though, if you look at it, the Merry Wives of Windsor is obviously the Merry Wives of Windsor. It's pretty obvious that they're talking about Shakespeare here, even though everything is misspelled. Yeah, the second sheet is just more of the same. Merchant of Venice, Henry V, all in front of the king, and much of the court. There's also many other records. For example, a court payment in 1595 to William Kemp, William Shakespeare, and Richard Burbage, servants to the Lord Chamberlain. 1599, listing of the Globe figure as being occupied by William Shakespeare. 3 legal documents listing primary tenants of the Globe as William Shakespeare and Richard Burbage. Shakespeare's name appears on a license for the creation of the King's Men. And the will of one of his fellow players also mentions his name as my fellow William Shakespeare. Leaves him money as well. And he also leaves money to several of the other King's Men. To move on to his education. A common misconception is that Shakespeare was never educated because there are no records of him ever going to school. There are no surviving records at all at the Latin Grammar School at Stratford that Shakespeare would have attended. Attendance records from that period of history are very sparse. However, we do know that the school did exist. He would have been given a free education due to his father's position as an alderman. We also know that Shakespeare was literate because of legal documents from his home in Stratford-upon-Avon. He had a library. As an actor, he would have been required to be able to read. Though it's true that Shakespeare did sign his name with a mark on many different documents, that was quite common for the times. And even people who could write and were extremely literate did sign their names with a mark. There's also problems suggesting that not having proper education would make it impossible to be a playwright. For example, a notable playwright called Ben Jonson was incredibly influential in Elizabethan England, and still is today. He never received a higher education. And he's also considered the Bible of Shakespeare, and there actually exists evidence of him naming Shakespeare as a Bible playwright, and also as a really good person. Can you go? I'm done.
The next argument we'd like to bring up is the existence of errors in Shakespeare's work. There is no evidence that Shakespeare did or did not travel overseas. Regardless, there are countless obvious geographical errors in Shakespeare's books. In The Winter's Tale, he writes of a shipwreck on the coast of Bohemia, which is modern-day landlocked Czechoslovakia. In Two Gentlemen of Verona, he writes of traveling by ship between the two inland cities of Verona and Milan. In Taming of the Shrew, he writes of Tranio's father being a sailmaker in Bergamo, which is an odd place for a sailmaker to do business, as it is in the foothills of the Italian Alps, over 80 miles from the nearest coast. It is unlikely anyone with a high-class education would have made these obvious errors. Shakespeare's writing is middle-class in a way that an aristocrat's writer would never have been able to replicate. The character Falstaff notes that as a boy he was small enough to creep into any alderman's thumb ring. It is much more likely that this particular image would be thought of by an alderman's son like Shakespeare rather than by an aristocrat. Shakespeare also used the word also very rarely. It appeared just 36 times in all his plays and usually only in the Dialogue of Fools. It was an odd prejudice and one not shared by any other writer of his age. Bacon sometimes used also as many times as on one page as Shakespeare did in his whole career. Other distinguishing habits include his use of hath over has, doth over doth, while the modern world was does and often used, and he also used might to might. The next argument we'd like to bring up is a timeline of when Shakespeare's plays were written. Bailiff? Although it is impossible to pin down exactly when Shakespeare wrote all of his plays, we can assemble a rough timeline which will prove to be very difficult in making the jobs of two authorship candidates, very difficult. Shakespeare wrote his first play in 1589. All of the authors who are represented here today were at least alive at this point. The writing of Shakespeare's plays continued for 24 years, give or take, until 1613. Sir Francis Bacon was indeed alive throughout this period. Edward de Vere died in 1604. It is possible, albeit unlikely, that he was unable to write the last plays and had them written later with scheduled publishings. This is not possible with Christopher Marlowe, who died in 1593. Is it really possible for one man who lived only until 29 to write 24 years of plays on top of his own plays, and knowing his own death to be imminent, have had them scheduled for publishing up till 30 years after his death? The final argument we'd like to make is about the motives for potential other candidates for authorship. An important overlooked facet of the Shakespeare authorship controversy is by anti-Stratfordians is a question of motives. For a crime to have been committed, the prosecutors must prove that there is both a methodology and a motive for the crime to have been committed. William Shakespeare, the educated lover of the arts, was both able to write the plays and had a vested interest in doing so. The anti-Stratfordians allege that other potential authors were afraid of political persecution and therefore attempted to hide their identities. A simple history lesson proves that during the period in which Shakespeare's plays were written, a usurpation caused a transition from a Protestant to a Catholic monarchy. This transition should have triggered a wave of revelations by supposedly real authors, but did not. This proves that there was no motive for secrecy in the case of the Shakespeare authorship controversy.
I want to note that I went to iParty this weekend to look for a bailiff's costume. I now feel that it's, because of the court,
Right.
But iParty only has children's police outfits or inappropriate sort of sexy Halloween police costumes with things that aren't really like pants, but more like chaps with a lot of holes in them. So I wasn't going to wear those for you guys. So, I tried, though.
Mr. Baker, do you want a hat?
Oh, that would help, yeah.
It's a police officer's hat. Oh, that's good.
Oh, yes. All is perfect.
Go ahead.
All right.
Moving on.
With the Shakespeare being educated and yet misspelling things, Mary Weaves of Windsor, that's a common way to write V's back then. So it's actually not spelled incorrectly. Usually if they ran out of V's on the printing press, their V's used instead. Same, and it's just a common way of writing stuff in official documents.
Also, you talked about the geography, correct?
Yeah.
So, are you aware?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Are you aware of the scene in Hamlet that was edited for geographical correctness?
Yes.
You are?
You're talking about the scene that was added by the yacht?
No, the between edition 1 and edition 2, the edit that was made to correct the fact that Denmark has no mountains.
You're not aware. Just saying, you're not aware.
We're not aware, but that would go through why Shakespeare is
Okay.
unable to.
So, in the first edition, there was, at the end of one of the scenes, there's a comment that there's something about Denmark's big mountain, or the mountains of Denmark. And then in the second edition, it's corrected to the hills. I guess there are hills. So how would you account for this change of Shakespeare?
An editor?
Yeah, a future editor. The plays were potentially altered over time. That does not deny the fact that Shakespeare was the original author, or his idea was what made the play. But a future editor could have changed that as a minor issue.
Why would the editor only change that one play?
Because that's the only one we're not really sure.
Okay.
The editor.
You say that someone was a sailmaker, and it's a place that's not near the ocean. Sail is another word for canvas. So it's possible that it could have been a popular textile